Hi, it's Dave from Telescribe and Nothing Gain, and with me today is Andy from the Nomadic Rain and Kirk from Screen Blast Repeat, and you are watching the ADK Rock and Metal channel. Okay, we are back with another retrospective review. We are going all the way back to 1985 this time. So we'll go back 40 years to check out Corrosion of Conformity and their album Animosity. Now, the reason we picked this one is a few months ago, we did the Corrosion of Conformity, probably their biggest album, in my opinion, their Deliverance album, one of my favourite albums of all time. And Corrosion of Conformity has come up as a band in discussions about where if you pick the wrong point in their history, you're going to get a very different experience in their albums. Because even with this particular album, they go back to this in like 2012, I think it is, or around that sort of region. They go back to this lineup and this style, and then they go back to their stoner stuff. In 2018, around that sort of period of time, 2017, 2018. So this is a band, depending on which album, you're going to get a completely different vibe. And I thought this was a really interesting one. And Andy, you'd already said that you'd always heard of this band, and the t-shirt specifically, everyone wearing their Corrosion of Conformity t-shirts, and that was really from this era of Corrosion of Conformity, the early stages. So yeah, it was worth doing it, and it was an album none of us had heard. So it was really cool to kind of go check this one out. So to get a bit more background on the album, I'm going to hand it over to Kirk to give us a bit of a rundown.
Those that know Corrosion of Conformity as an edgy band that scooped a major label deal in the 1990s and produced classics such as Blind and Deliverance will be surprised to learn of their origins. 40 years ago, the band were a three-piece of Mike Dean on vocals and bass, Woody Weatherman on guitars, and Reed Mullen on drums, and they played a menacing form of hardcore punk fused with thrash metal. Released on the 25th of October 1985, Animosity is a celebrated early example of the crossover thrash sound and has proved influential with the likes of Metallica, Mr. Bungle, and Agoraphobic Nosebleed, all covering songs from this album. You can hear its punk origins, but the riffs have more in common with Celtic Frost, and the production is closer to Venom and Discharge. It'd be the last album to feature this trio until it reformed for 2012's self-titled comeback LP, yet many remember this period as a glorious era that thrived on instability as much as attitude and integrity.
Okay, Kirk, do you want to take us through our agenda for today? You lead this as always, so over to you.
Yeah, happy to do it. So as you said, none of us have given this a listen until this session when we put it in the calendar. So let's start by picking out some of our favourite songs. When you say a song, can you just give if you can, the track number as well? I think that'll just help our viewers. But yeah, Dave, let's start with you because we know you're the most invested in this. You're a big fan of this band. Could you find at least 2 or 3 songs that stand out for you?
So I knew of I'd heard the 2012 album called Corrosion of Conformity when and the one that followed it, which was 9, I think it was called.
Yeah, 2014. Yeah.
And I'd heard this kind of thrashy, hardcore punk style from them, and I'm like, is this what they were before? Is this what they did at the earlier? And I never experienced it. And interestingly, the album that comes after this, Blind, I've got that album, and it's a phenomenal album. But it's very different to the one that followed that, which was Deliverance. So I was kind of like, I'm not sure what I was going to get on here. So when I first started playing this, my first thing was, what the actual fuck am I listening to? I did manage to find a few tracks that I really enjoyed. I'm going to pick out track number 3, Consumed. To me, sounds really like early Metallica. There's even a riff in there which kind of sounded a bit like Master of Puppets to me. Just not quite as strong, even though Master of Puppets came out a year later than this, but it had the Master of Puppets kind of vibe for me. There's a good sense of variety within this track. I like the tempo changes as well within this song because there were some interesting time changes. Cool bass fills as well, which was really Mike Dean showing off his bass prowess. So yeah, I thought this one was really interesting, whereas some of the other stuff on the album was a bit too either on the nose or just off its face chaotic for the sake of being chaotic. This felt a little bit more structured. The other one I liked here was track number 5, Positive Outlook. I love the solo bass kicking into this one. Awesome drums. It is frantic though. This one, same as I've said, it was not everything feels like this a lot of the time. But it felt a real crazy track. There was times where it felt like the beat was lost with what the guitar was doing. Like they didn't quite know what the hell they had this idea of they wanted to go in there and do this raw live performance album. But the guitarist is just riffing, and hasn't really thought, well, hang on, this doesn't quite work with what the drummer's doing right now. The drummer's just trying to put his own kind of vibe on it. But I thought it was quite interesting. It adds to the kind of unique charm of the song. I thought the bass switch up to the fuzz wasn't great, though. I liked his clean tone, and he decides to put this fuzzy bass tone on halfway through on part of the song. And I'm like, yeah, not a big fan of that. But it's still a good track. I found it interesting though when it switched at 1 minute 40 into the classic stoner groove that we got to know from them. In 1990 was it 1994's Deliverance album? So when we got to 1994's, you suddenly hear this, and you can hear it here. And this has not got obviously Pepper Keenan in, who would be the guy that you would say has brought the stoner. Because whenever it's just the three of these guys, Woody, Reed Mullin, and Mike Dean. When it's just the three of them, they were not the stoner guys. They were the thrash, hardcore kind of guys. So, but I can understand listening to that song why Metallica were big fans of this particular band, and even brought them out on them when they did their big Cunning Stunts tour on the back of Load. So yeah, they were my 2.
Andy, you said that people used to see people wearing the T-shirt. I'm guessing around 85, 86, would people also be wearing the T-shirt of Stormtroopers of Death and DRI and crossover bands like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my sort of first experience of Corrosion of Conformity was from sort of like the skater world. I was kind of a bit of a skateboarder at sort of 12, 13 when this album came out, and a friend of mine was sort of well into sort of US hardcore in particular. So that sort of skull, that spiky skull sort of emblem logo of Corrosion of Conformity, I used to see a lot. Stickers on boards, caps, perhaps a bit more than sort of T-shirts. But yeah, you mentioned DRI. That's the sort of first thing that comes to mind on the opening track. So on our sort of usual agenda, we talk about the first and last track. So they are 2 of my sort of better ones. So I won't go into too much detail on those. But Dave, you mentioned the word chaotic in your sort of summary. That is the one word sort of note I made for Intervention. That's not one of my favourites, but that sort of sums up that particular track and certainly certain parts of the album. You've also answered another sort of query I had. It seems to me throughout this album there's some pretty decent sort of solos and there's some absolutely dreadful ones. So I didn't know if there were 2 guitarists, but you've confirmed that there are 3-piece. So he's obviously sort of whoever the guitarist is.
Woody Weatherman is called.
Yeah, he's put a little bit more into some tracks and not so much others. You also mentioned, I think, Dave, about you felt the sort of timing was off and the drummer was playing something different to the guitarist. Again, that's my overall feel for some tracks. It just seemed like a bit of a jam rather than sort of well prepared, well written and well recorded songs. It just seemed a bit like a bit of a jam that they put to tape. But going back to my sort of favourite songs, yes, I've got Consumed as well. There's a sort of very fast sort of solo bass that leads into this song, and probably 3 or 4 others that follow it, which is a style that Corrosion of Conformity adopted at the time. It's sort of a little bit sort of unusual for me, but it sort of works for this style of music. Frantic as well. This is the one that's got the sort of fairly decent solos. So that was one of my favourite tracks. Again, I'll go with Positive Outlook. Has that same frantic, fast bass intro, another sort of one of the better solos, but this particular track has a riff where I think you mentioned it being the sort of stoner feel day for this one. They sort of slow it down and they slow it down again, which is sort of like that meme in it, you know, when the band plays that nasty riff and they slow it down even more, and it is even more appealing. So, I mean, there's sort of 4 or 5 sort of tracks that I picked out as my highlights. Those are 2, but the first and the closing track are also on that list as well. But we'll come to those later.
Yeah, mine originally matched the 2 that you've chosen. I did stick with track number 3 as my favourite. Consumed. Dave, I'm going to read out the first sentence. It starts like Master of Puppets, but without the downward picking.
Yeah.
In the chord strike. So I also picked up on that as well. And it's a year before, isn't it?
It is,
of course, Metallica's, other than the chords, is nothing like that. They're very...
No wonder they liked it.
Yeah, exactly.
Give them something to write to.
And at track 3 as well, it's only 2 minutes, 51 seconds. It's good to hear Reed Mullin race through the D beats. You've definitely got your Discharge influence there, your hardcore influence. And I think this music, it's already, by track number 3, you realise it's all about adrenaline and making you feel like you can stand up to your enemies and overcome any challenge. I know that it's very political, the message. It's a very, I wouldn't say radical left wing. It's a very much an intolerant but humanitarian political approach, isn't it? Very distrustful of institutions and power elites that run society and government, etc. And on this, Woody Weatherman, he very much likes that successive power chord, the chromatics, they're called do, 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 you know, and then the D beats following it. So, good song. The other thing I'd say about this, the irony is that Slayer are the most influential band, aren't they, on modern metallic hardcore. That needs revising. Corrosion of Conformity need to still be in that conversation. You can already hear their influence. Considering this is 1985, and you compare where Slayer are with Hell Awaits, they're not miles apart, but clearly on different trajectories. So, and I also love how you can hear pitches of feedback. I was going to go for Positive Outlook, but yeah, the cool bass intro before the guitars come in. The only weakness, though, is the vocal delivery. He's very much influenced, isn't he, Mike Dean, by HR from Bad Brains, to the point where at times he almost sounds neo-Rastafarian. And at other times it sounds really grisly and like almost proto-death metal. It's a quite strange mix, but Bad Brains are clearly a big influence. I love how loud the bass is in the mix on Positive Outlook. And you can still hear it, especially when it's diverging away from the crispy guitars. You're right, there is the first sign of a stoner riff in there as well in the transition to that mid-tempo metal riff at 1 minute 37. And what I really picked up here, are we hearing one of the first ever breakdown rituals, which of course comes from hardcore, doesn't it? When they slow that riff down, Andy, as you pointed out, even further at the 2 minute mark, that would qualify nowadays as a breakdown if they maintained a harder drum beat, which was a criticism you said about this song, Dave, and also if they added palm muting. So this is, I would say it's quite original for 1985, this song. But anyway, I went for track number 6, Prayer. And I wouldn't be surprised if Voivod were listening to this when they started to incorporate hardcore punk into their avant-garde thrash approach 2 years later. And they would have been, because they're on the same label, Metal Blade. So you can even see the influence Corrosion of Conformity have had on an avant-garde band like Voivod. It's not exactly original if you look at it as abrasive punk music, but you'll understand its impact if you view it through the lens of thrash metal and where that genre was in 1985, still in its embryonic stages. This is part of that. Other than the solos, though, Weatherman, he never really deviates away, does he, from the power chords or riffing on the open E string. Most of the songs are open E string, but really impressive, you know, the rhythmic prowess that he's using. And it applies to most of the tracks on Animosity. So, yeah, it's interesting how we really converged on the same songs. I still, given the tone of what we're saying, I can't tell who enjoyed this album and not. So I'm looking forward to the answers to this next part. What are the high points of this album? Andy, let's start with you.
Not many.
There we go. So at least now we know where one of us stands.
Yeah. I mean, we're going to talk about Lost for Words, but, you know, my initial thoughts are this is like a world away from the limited Corrosion of Conformity material I've heard. I didn't do the Deliverance album review with yourselves. We've done Vote for a Bullet, and I think another one, you know, on the later tracks as sort of video reviews here on the channel. And yeah, I can dig the sort of stoner sort of groove on those tracks. But this to me was, from the opening sort of notes was like early DRI. It took me back to 12, 13 when my friend used to put on, the skater band albums from America at the time, Jodie Foster Army, Gorilla Biscuits, all those sort of US hardcore. And there were sort of dedicated skater bands that weren't quite metal, but sort of punk rock sort of crossovers. And, it was okay. I remember sort of listening to and quite enjoying some of the stuff. So, the high points, there's one or two sort of tracks that stand out. There are indicators of what they would become with the sort of stoner material on a couple of tracks, particularly the closing one and the which was Consumed, I think, as well. No, sorry, Positive Outlook. So I can't really praise it any more than that, unfortunately.
So what are the low points then? Is that the right term, low points, or just what were the flaws or what put you off?
At times it did sound very sort of rough in the recording. It certainly sounded better on sort of my fairly decent headphones than on sort of speakers in a vehicle. At times, I think we both mentioned it sounded like a bit of a jam rather than sort of polished songs ready to be recorded in the studio. Again, there's not really much in the way of low points either. It's not a terrible album by any means of stretch of the imagination. It's a fledged, the initial recording or output from a young band from 40 years ago, creating a style or certainly, one of the sort of leaders of a sort of new emerging style of music, which is still probably niche and not as mainstream as it should be. So there's no real high positives or no real low negatives.
Dave, go on, we want to hear from you then. Because
Okay.
you heard the 2012 album when this lineup reformed and was playing this type of music.
Yeah.
I've not. Other than production, is it very similar, the 1985 album to the 2012 one?
The 2012 one is better, not just from a production point of view, but from the idea of songwriting. So for me, this is a case of every time they got into it, it's like a jumble sale. I feel like it's like a TK Maxx of an album. You go in there and you're trying to find something, and you've got to go for about a million different things till you find the fucking bit you want, and then you've got to go down another aisle to find another bit. The albums are all over the place as far as you get a cool riff somewhere, and then just as soon as that one's come on, they decide to let's do a beat change up or let's do a riff change up, and you're like, but did you really need to do that? If you just took some time back, think about the song structure, you had some really good ideas here, but you've thrown in a load of off the wall kind of tempo bits or bad solos. I mean, the solos on this were an awful solo. They were like classic thrash metal solos with no thought behind them. It was just like, let's play them as fast as we can. The guitar tone was raw, oversaturated at points. It grated on me as well, the guitar solos, when I kicked through, because obviously, as you said, I said it's a free piece, but of course they put, unlike Pantera, they've put a guitar backing track behind it, so live they wouldn't have been able to cover that. So I'm not sure why they did that on the album in the first place, apart from just trying to make it sound fuller. But for me, it just I found myself, as Andy said, there isn't really any highs, but there isn't any real lows in it, because there's loads of interesting parts to this album. But I found myself getting to the end of it feeling very indifferent about it. I could take it or leave it, this album. I could spend loads of time on it, pulling out the really interesting parts, or I could just ignore it completely, and I wouldn't mind either way. It doesn't really bother me. So it's one of those ones. But I also found that with the 2012 Corrosion of Conformity album and the 2014 IX. I was the same. I listened to it. I was like, production's better, songwriting's better. But again, the songs aren't interesting enough, because obviously I know the rest of their lineup. And I found it really interesting that apart from Wood, they had a light with basically, Mike Dean left the band before The Blind when they got a new lineup in.
Yeah.
And Mike Dean on vocals is not great. He can kind of carry a tune, but he's not a great vocalist. I mean, I would say that on like the song Kiss of Death, it sounds a bit of a cross between Iron Maiden and Dead Kennedys vocally delivering. and you're like, okay, but Dead Kennedys was never a great vocal band, so you don't really want that comparison to be thrown in there.
It's a death, Dave. Just before you move on, you mentioned Iron Maiden. To me, that sounded like the intro to Prowler, not
yeah. So I lost you there,
the vocal delivery, the sort of intro to the song, that sort of single guitar. It was like Iron Maiden's Prowler, but carry on.
Yeah, that's kind of where my head was going with it when I was listening. I was going, this definitely feels like an Iron Maiden track I've heard somewhere along the line. But yeah, and then the vocal kicks in. I'm like, that just sounds like Dead Kennedy vocals attempt at trying to give that attitude. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I think it's a period of timepiece that maybe if you grew up with it, you'd be sitting there going, this is a great track, this is a great album, because it was a moment in my time. But looking back at this, for all of us who've never heard it, you go back and listen to it and you're like, nah, comparing it to anything today, it's very difficult. But there were some really interesting parts to this album, and I'm just so glad that they have taken some of the better bits and moved them into their future. But what about you, Kirk?
Yeah, the first thing, to me, it's interesting, almost like a history lesson, listening to this album to understand where crossover comes from, how thrash metal incorporated hardcore, why hardcore became accepted by metalheads, and even vice versa. So the standout to me, it is a hardcore album for the thrash metal crowd. I don't think that was the intention at the time in 1985, because it's still fresh, it's still new, and most artists aren't really concerned with what audience are we writing for. They're just writing music, especially something like this, which you said does sound like a jam session. But that's the whole point. Spontaneity, attitude, integrity, love it. And that spirit and energy really does come through on this record. The bass fills, love them. Dave, you've pointed them out. Underneath the guitar is very impressive for somebody who's singing at the same time. That really does drag you away sometimes, doesn't it? Which is good, because, a lot of these songs do sound the same on the surface, and when you listen to them with headphones, as you said, Andy, it's a better listening experience. I think you can appreciate it more. And the guitar tone is really impressive. It's really crunchy. I always mention them, but to me, the best guitar tone, other than Metallica, of the 80s is Celtic Frost, and this is almost as good. It's raw, but it's very crunchy as well, really dark. So you've done a great job, the audio engineering, especially when you listen to other Metal Blade albums around this time. Voivod's Raw album is atrocious, the production on the guitar. There is a fondness, isn't there, for some, perhaps the naivety of some of these early records. I'll give you an example. Now people are venerating those first two Sepultura records, which we know the production is abysmal, but you can go back and enjoy it when you look at how thrash metal and death metal and black metal evolved, after 1985. They did have an influence on it. So this, very influential album. And I really want to encapsulate that. I'm going to start the next, but we always talk about the opening song. Track number 1, Lost for Words. I think it does encapsulate how good this album is, because you've got this ringing power chord which fizzes out, and then you've got crashing cymbals to set the scene. And it is a Bad Brains assault at first. That's what it sounds like. When I've listened to it the second and third time, I'm getting different reaction. So Mike Dean, he does sound semi-Rastafarian in his vocal delivery. He does, though. I like how rough the guitar tone is, overflowing with electricity, isn't it? You can hear the plectrum burrowing into the strings. He's really got his hand on the bridge of the guitar and palm muting it, which again was not everyone was doing that. You listen to the first two Venom records, they're trying to do it. They don't really have the tone. Metallica are the first to really capture that, aren't they? Where it is really crunchy and becomes a recognized rhythmic technique in heavy metal. Single track vocals, though, in Lost for Words, absolutely buried in the mix as a result. I am surprised, though, Dave, as you pointed out, how many tempo changes and non-repeating parts you can hear in track 1. This is an album of 26 minutes in length. And track number 1 is, I think, probably the second longest, 4 minutes. My God, there's a lot going on. So finally, before I pass it to you, I said that I wanted to use this to encapsulate what this album represents. And I think, if you listen to it, there are bands today in metallic hardcore that still want to recreate the sound, which they're going to struggle to do even if they're using analog. It's a magical era of music. And I think that's mainly as a reaction to the overproduced nonsense coming out of the deathcore movement, plastic extreme metal, as some of us call it, myself included. It's just unlistenable deathcore. This is hardcore with metal in it, and I would choose this any day over that, you know, saturated asinine deathcore crap that passes for metal these days. So anyway, now I've had my rant. Andy, track number 1, Lost for Words. Were you lost for words?
No, it sort of really does set the scene, as you rightly said, and as I mentioned earlier, it's one of my favourite tracks, probably the strongest. At 4 minutes, it is one of the longest, only matched by the closer, which we'll talk about as well. But as you rightly said, Kurt, there's a lot in this particular song, and it does sort of encapsulate, or my notes do, my feelings of the whole album, in as much as I thought the vocals are pretty poor throughout. This is an example of one of those terrible solos. There is a bit of variation at sort of 1 minute 40, as we talked about, and was sort of a breakdown in inverted commas for the sort of last 45 seconds or so of the song. But, you know, not hearing this period of this particular band, my initial first thing I wrote down was DRI. You know, early DRI, before they were known for their sort of crossover thrash, you know, the Four of a Kind album, and the one that preceded that, which I can't recall off the top of my head. You know, there's the sort of the benchmark of crossover US thrash was DRI. But before that, they were like early Corrosion of Conformity, chaotic, frantic solos, fast bass passages, and that was the first thing that sprang to mind. But yeah, it's certainly one of the stronger tracks, and they done well to put it there, or it's a good decision to put it at the opening of the album. But unfortunately, it goes a bit downhill from there on.
Dave, it's very important, isn't it? The first track to set the scene. Is it successful for you?
It was, as I said, it was a bit of a shock from the production point of view when I first heard it, because I having known Blind and then thinking, okay, preceding last full album before Blind, I was thinking you can't be that much far away from those two albums, and I was like, holy fuck, they are miles away as far as songwriting, production, stylization, the sort of music you're playing. So it kind of caught me completely off guard. I did write at one point, the vocals remind me of Gwar. It was just Gwar doing thrash. I was like, it's just there's something about over pronunciation that Mike really likes to kind of go a little bit over the top on it. I did love the groove breakdown at 2:30. So when it kicks in that groove breakdown, although the solo works, it's not a great solo, but it works in line. But it was more in line again with what I was expecting from Deliverance. So again, it was like, okay, they have got some of that, and it's not all just Pepper Keenan when he joined. So it was kind of a bit of a stoner thrash track. But yeah, do you know what, from the local scene? Do you know what this does remind me of? In hindsight, from our last ADK Present show was Killer Corp. The chaotic nature of Killer Corp's live set, where they're just doing lots of different things, and you're sitting there going, we're talking about like there's a Slipknot vibe to them, but they were just constantly like, what the hell's the next bit they're doing? And the vocalist is going off on one, and the guitar, the drummer's like, dun, dun, I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? And that's exactly where this album and that starting track does. The tempo changes, the riff changes. It's just as you said, it needs more than a one or two listens. You have to kind of sit down and get your head around it to try and get. You almost want to sit down with the guys and go, talk us through the writing process here. I really want to know how these songs came together, because nowadays when you're writing songs, you can record something and send it out to people. There wasn't that functionality really. It would have been in the studio writing, and I'm just curious as to half this stuff. Like, how the fuck did you get from that bit to that bit? Where did that idea was that? Because it sounds like a jam. It sounds like two microphones set up in a room, press record, there you go, there's the album. But I don't get how they got through those transitions or how they came together. So it is an interesting album, and the first song does set it up right.
What do you think about the closing track then, the title track, number 10, Animosity?
I was really interested on this one when it first kicked in. So when that bluesy riff kicked in, I'm like, okay, so this is basically what you're going to do in 9 years' time. That first part of that song, I was like, why is this on this album? Everything up to this point has been this thrash hardcore thing, and then you've launched into this Sabbath-esque metal riff. And then, of course, they then go and change it and decide, hey, we'll go off and do a thrash part, the second part of this. And then I was like, okay. But I found it interesting. It was no vocals on it. It was why it's an instrumental. Why do we keep getting these weird instrumentals at the last fucking song on these albums that we keep reviewing? Let's whack an instrumental track in there. But again, I would say it's an interesting start to the track. But when I think of instrumental pieces, I think of transitional pieces. This felt like a jam piece. It didn't feel like it was going anywhere particularly. We just seemed to be going round and round on these riffs. And yeah, we had the Sabbath blues stuff at the beginning, then we went into a thrash kind of vibe. But it just felt like, and the Corrosion of Conformity do this stuff like this live on their song Clean My Wounds. They actually have a full 6-7 minute section they just add live that they just do a full jam. And then they go back into the song, and it's kind of this sort of stoner blues vibe. And it kind of works from a live. I don't know if I'd do it on an album as a closer. I'm not sure. I mean, they needed to maybe they had to get over the 25-minute mark, and so they had to put a song on to get it to the album. But you're at 9 songs in. Would it have been better to finish on Hungry Child? Possibly. I don't see the benefit of this as a closing song. Whereas at least with Lost for Words makes sense as an opener. This, again, doesn't really tell me anything much, apart from giving me an idea that they knew exactly where they would be in 9 years' time with the start of the track.
Yeah, I mean, it's tempting to read into the future because of what we know. But, I mean, even that 1991 album, the lineup, other than Reed Mullins and Woody, Pepper comes in, doesn't he? And they've got that vocalist Carl in there, so completely different band. Yeah, I mean, Andy, what did you put for the closing track?
Echo a lot of what Dave said, to be honest. There are, lots of different things going on. Seems very bass driven as a track. It's sort of high on the mix in this one, and it is I noted down that it is an indicator to what they would do in the future. I mean, like I said, I can't think I've listened to any albums other than the couple that we've covered on the channel and the famous few sort of music videos, but it's a real sort of show of what they were working towards, and it does seem to sort of stand out for that reason. I enjoyed the slower tempo of this, which is obviously the stoner element that would come. Various styles in this one track, and it seems strange. You might be absolutely right, Dave. They might have sort of put the songs in the can, and it's still coming in a little bit short, and they thought, well, we've got this sort of track for the future. Let's sort of record that and put that at the end as a sort of finisher for this album, and perhaps a taste of what's to come if they were thinking that far ahead. But I mean, it was one of the better ones. Strangely enough, that's the ones that I sort of put on the shortlist as one of the sort of more favourable songs in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm asking similar questions to you two. First thing, could they have done something with it rather than leaving it as a closing instrumental? Are we to assume that they didn't have the vocal capabilities to match the vision of the song, or they needed to get it beyond 20 minutes so they can call it a long play record? I do like the gallop in the intro and the presence of the bass. Yeah, it's extremely loud there, isn't it? I think fans of Slayer's Hell Awaits, the actual song Hell Awaits, would enjoy this. You've got that extended intro. That's why I'm disappointed vocals don't come in at any time, because it feels like it's building to it. And then at the 2 minutes 18 seconds, when it cuts to a guitar panned in one speaker playing really fast, the drums are going to come in. You are expecting his neo Rastafarian voice, which wouldn't make it any worse. It would. Sorry, it's already a good song. I don't think it would ruin it having vocals in. But I think really the benefit of listening to this in hindsight, this is a great example of 1985 where hardcore and heavy metal are beginning to converge without the hardcore scene really knowing it. I don't think they're intending this to happen, but they clearly recognize if you're going to be playing some mean riffs, thrash metal is where to go, isn't it? To get that inspiration. And then ironically, nowadays thrash has taken hardcore in, hasn't it, as its main influence. Because a lot of those bands in the late 80s moved on to death metal. So really interesting for that. I think for the musicianship, there's a couple of bullet points I just want to raise. Musicianship is less of a priority for this type of music. It is about attitude and integrity. So I'm never going to be critical. And it's on record. Some of my favourite bands are not technical. Guess which one from Switzerland? I won't say their name. I do think that the drums are impressive because they've got to be alert to a lot of tempo changes. Dave, you said, I'm not sure how they've completed this transition or this modulation. You're right, it's interesting to analyze that. And I do like how the bass is often willing to work the scales of the fretboard rather than just play the root notes. The guitar solos aren't that bad. There are some, no thought gone into them. It's just a pentatonic solo. The tone is atrocious. It's just a dry plug-in. It's 1985 though, isn't it? You know, what can we expect? You listen to Led Zeppelin, Heartbreaker, and Jimmy Page's solo on that. It does sound atrocious to the ears now, doesn't it? But that's from, 1969? So I think we can't really blame them for that. They just didn't have the tools to capture it. And come on, the most famous band for having unlistable solos is probably Slayer, isn't it? We don't really hold that against them. What about you guys? I know you've already picked up on some of the things you didn't like about the musicianship and also things that stood out. Is there anyone who wants to have a last word on the musicianship before we talk quickly about the production of the record?
No,
I think we've covered it. Dave, production. I know you're always critical of this, but you are at least thinking, well, it's 1985 technology, like with that Destruction album. What lets this down, though, in terms of production?
I think for me, they went in there knowing what they wanted to do. So I think they got the result they kind of wanted. They wanted a raw, hardcore punk attitude. Otherwise, if they hadn't wanted that, they would have done more work on it. Because you could have, you can't blame a studio for something like this. You could blame if the mix was so bad that you go, well, I couldn't hear any of the bass in it, or the vocals were drowned out on the tracks. Then you could go, okay, the production's at fault here. But everything's balanced fine. But some of the tone on the guitars and the solos, for instance, weren't dialed in great. I think that's just a little bit of, I hadn't thought about it enough in the studio. I think they just put a booster on a guitar tone and went, fuck it, that'll do. It's punk rock, it's attitude, man, it's fine. And I think that's how they've approached it. It could have been reduced studio time. I mean, they could have probably knocked this out in a day, this album, in all honesty. And by the sound of it, at certain points, the way they're doing it, doesn't sound like it's massively done to a click track or anything like that. It feels very much that this was probably in a room, mic'd everything up, and then vocals probably done either separate in another room with bass playing at the same time, or just done in the aftermath. Generally, when we talk about albums coming out of the 80s, the amount of time we talk about one of these albums and the production is out of this similar level, there's very few, apart from some of these big bands, where the production is really good. It's only really when we get to the 90s that generally recording production, unless you're not one of the biggest bands, suddenly generally starts to go up in the small studios. Otherwise, it's all kind of this rawness. But overall, production-wise, it's that pre-production piece I would have hoped the band had done more on, which is just that little bit of dialing everything in. So some of these bits where there's sloppy drums and guitars, guitars try to do a fast part alongside the drums, and you can feel that they go out of time, then they come back in on time, and you're like, you could have dialed that in a little bit better for me. And I think that's from the production overall.
Andy, I'm going to ask you a question. Not exactly what do you think of the production.
Good.
So we know that over the next few years, AI is going to be part of music to the point where you might not be able to tell if there is any human agencies there, or it's someone just typing in inputs and saying, give me Discharge plus Celtic Frost plus Venom plus DRI plus Slayer, and then putting that out and claiming that that's music. So my question, to what extent do you think we'll grow to value albums like this even more because of the human element and because of the flaws that are in there?
I think we will very much, because you mentioned, Dave, it's the attitude. It's, that they probably didn't have a lot of time or money, even though it's a label release. It does to me sound like a self-financed, self-produced sort of demo at times. But as Dave says as well, it's not so bad that the instrumentation is wrong and the mix is wrong. It's just, you mentioned, Dave, about the sort of the fast guitar part not quite being in tune with in line with the drums. I mean, is that musicianship rather than production? I don't know, but I think this is of its time, of its style, and I think the band have probably achieved what they set out to do. They don't want a polished record. They don't want, you know, note perfect solos and everything. I think they've captured the elements and the integrity of the band in those fledgling days with their, you know, first collection of songs, and, you know, using it as a foundation to move on if they, you know, if they want to sort of improve on the output in the future. So everyone's got to start somewhere. So I think it's an indication of what they wanted, and I think they got what they wanted.
Yeah, I think I am going to compare it with the fellow Metal Blade label mates in Voivod. Voivod's production is shockingly bad around this time, and I don't mean in a charming way. They just cannot capture the guitar. I think you use the term, Dave, tinny, don't you, for a guitar tone that you just like, how has that gone through like a 10-watt amp that you'd buy from Argos?
Rates on you.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas this, I think the guitar tone is really impressive. It's crispy, lot of electricity flowing through it, and you've got these feedback pitches in between the chords, which you really do get on the Creator and Sodom albums and Morbid Tales by Celtic Frost. So I do love that. I think that I am looking at this from a romantic point of view. You know, the naivety of the production is something that I do like as well, which was clearly not intended by the artist. And again, that's why those early Sepultura records are fascinating now, aren't they? Because you can understand what they're trying to do. They don't have the capability, certainly not the technology, yet you still love the effort that they've put in and the attitude and aesthetic. So I think that's the case here. But the production is far better than some of the contemporaries around this time, and better than the debut Megadeth album, which comes out in the same year. So not disastrous at all. Quickly, we'll go around the room before we do the verdict. Side A or side B? We always do this. Are we finally going to find an album where we all agree side B is better? Andy?
No, not for me, because I was zoning out as the album progressed, and I think that, you know, up until there's one that was mentioned that I haven't even got notes for. So as the album progressed towards its conclusion, I was, you know, zoning out, particularly on the review stage where I'm sitting down with pen and paper. Sorry, I've forgotten the question.
Yeah, side A or side B?
Oh, no, side B.
He's thinking about his dinner, isn't he? He's like, what could be having?
Side A, but through default of me perhaps not engaging enough for the whole vast 26 minutes or whatever it was.
Dave, is it a side A or side B record, this?
It's definitely a side A. I mean, I got to the track Positive Outlook, and after that I lost my positive outlook for the rest of the album, to be quite honest.
You've been thinking of that one liner all day, obviously.
I'll give you the idea. So if I look at my notes for the first 5 tracks, I've got 4 of those tracks have got loads of detail on them, lots of notes about them, with the exception of probably was it Hollier, which I just wasn't a fan of at all because of the dual vocals. I thought were awful. And then after that, my notes, apart from the last song, are single sentences for each of the other tracks.
Same here, Dave.
Good sign.
I just didn't have it because I think, to be honest, at that point, I'd heard everything that this album was going to deliver. Yeah. I was like, you just feel like, and this is frustrating. You've got 10 tracks in 26 minutes, and you're at the 5. You're on your 6th song, and you're like, you're just repeating yourself now, and you're doing the same. You're just coming in with punk, hardcore, thrash riffs. I need something new. You need to do something to break your album. What we've not had on this album, which we've had on every single other album we've talked about, is some form of palate cleanser. Now, I'm not saying they have to do a instrumental ballad or something to get, or an acoustic song on this album, but you need to give us something different to enable us to reset for that second half of the album, and they just don't do it. I thought they might on Intervention, where they did that bass effect at the start, and I thought, well, maybe they're going to go in some interesting Stoner Doom stage. This could be interesting. But no, they just went back into punk thrash again, and I was like, you've just gone back to doing what you were doing on the rest of the album. And at that point, I was starting to really tune out. And my literally, like, Hungry Child, I just went, aggressive punk metal. That's it. That was my entire note on it. I had nothing to add. So I was kind of glad that blues start on Animosity, to be quite honest, to give me something interesting to write about again.
Yeah, tracks 3, 4, 5, and 6, they've all started with this frantic, fast bass punch out with the guitar, and then you know, you got 3 more words than I wrote down for Hungry Child anyway, Dave.
He had 1 word.
Yeah, nothing for it.
I didn't even write the title down. I don't know. I must have fallen asleep at that point, and then woke up when sort of the, you know, variation and the interesting parts of Animosity kicked in.
You could have written down in your notes, I feel like a hungry child after listening to this.
Get in my belly.
Yeah, side A for me. Track number 4, Holier, I did like that, Dave. And I put down, if this isn't crossover thrash, what is? This is one of the earliest examples. It's like Bad Brains under the wrath of Metallica. And then I found out Metallica have actually covered this song live on at least 2 occasions. So that was a pleasant surprise. And how much is this different to Venom and Celtic Frost and even Discharge and even Slayer? Not much, but it's unique as well. And that's what they bring to the table. This is quite original. And as you said there, Andy, it looks like that this has influenced DRI as well, or they've, you know, they're around at the same time. So, yeah, I mean, the alt picking techniques from Metallica are superior, but these are really looking at it from the same angle as well. There's a lot of metal in this music. I think that's the important thing to say. At the time, it probably wasn't recognized, but now very easy to recognize despite the big influence of Discharge on this music. So yeah, side A for me. Side B, yeah, my notes become 1-2 sentences for the last 3 tracks until track number 10, Animosity. So we need to give our verdict on this. Dave, you go last because you picked this as the album that you wanted to cover. Let's start with Andy. Out of 10, but reasons why as well.
Yeah, I mean, reasons. I'll give some sort of statements first of all. We cover these albums. We do 1 or 2 a week. Me up every week and do the reviews. Even after the reviews, even when I've sat down and pen to paper and written down my notes and know what I'm going to talk about, I often go back to listen to them prior to doing the recording, you know, a couple of times, whatever. With this one, I just couldn't. You know, I'd done my homework. I don't need to look into it anymore, sir. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's kind of what I expected, you know, knowing that, you know, from when they first started, you know, the skater scene and the punk rock and the hardcore sort of origins of the band. So score-wise, it's going to be a generous 4.
4, okay, yep. Me next. I think it has stood the test of time, but also looking at it, knowing its impact, where music is in 1985 and how it evolves and how they've really shaped that. You know, they are what you would call in finance market makers. You know, they really have had an impact. You only have to look at the bands that have covered songs from this album. This is clearly the most influential album. So track 6, Prayer, has been covered many times by Mr. Bungle. Track number 9, Hungry Child, the one that neither of you like, has been covered by the grindcore band Agoraphobic Nosebleed, great band. And then Metallica have covered track 4, Holier. So, you know, that is the biggest compliment you can get as a musician, isn't it? If your peers are covering your music and saying this influenced us. So I think it stood the test of time because I do like the production, but I am conscious that I have become one of these people who sees the charm in the naivety of some aspects of it, which are unintentional from the band at the time. Really good album, 7.5 out of 10 for me. I really enjoyed it just as much as I would enjoy, you know, listening to Morbid Tales by Celtic Frost or Welcome to Hell by Venom. Dave, I think yours is the most important one because this is your band, isn't it? And this is a way outside of the Corrosion of Conformity that you love listening to.
And this would be why I've picked the score I've picked for this particular album. Before I give the score, I'll give you my reasoning behind it. But so when I listen to any of the Corrosion of Conformity albums from Blind onwards, I listen to, well, with the exception of the 2012 one and 2014, but with all the ones that's basically got Pepper in, I can sit down and listen to them. I can sing along. I can get into my vibe. I can drive with them, and I've got the hook. I've got the groove. It's an album I want to listen to. It's an album you put on at home or in the car and listen to. This is not an album for that. This is a promotional material for your live show. This is what you take to say, you want to come and watch us live? This is what we're going to deliver for you. Because I can imagine all those songs as a teenager in a crowd in 1985 in a bar with these guys playing, this would be a great memory of that night. Because these are this, and you'd listen to this after they go, fuck yeah, that was crazy. I was in the pit, I was jumping around, we were all going crazy, we were windmill kicking, we were going crazy, and you'd love it. But I can't see this as an album to sit down and put on and go, oh, just gonna crack open a beer and sit in my armchair and play a bit of Animosity. This would be lovely, this album. It's just not I don't think this is what this album's designed for. This is purely a promotional material, and that's what albums were. If you think about it back in the day, yes, you're promoting it to get people out to your shows as well, but the shows were there to promote your albums as well. And merchandise, I mean, they were one of the biggest bands for merch back in the day. I mean, really were, as far as, I mean, people knew about them just from their merch because they were so good at it, and people really wanted their great logo. But as an album, I just don't think this stands up and has any significant relevance to a modern day listener. It's got a piece of history, so it deserves to be in a museum to explain something about that past history, about what that part was like. We can talk about many albums from many bands through the years, like the very first Motorhead album. It's a very important album, but it is a shit album. From Motorhead, it's not good. So for me, I'm going to give this a 5 out of 10 for my score. So now you can do a quick calculator there for us.
I think we'll round it up. It comes in at 5.5. Should we be generous and round it up to 6 out of 10?
I'll give it a 6. I think we'll give it a 6.
6 out of 10. Yeah, I really enjoyed this. I think it was a good pick. I hope our viewers get as much out of it as we did. You know, we have tried to forensically pull it apart and explain why we liked or disliked it. And certainly, I hope that just watching this, people will go and just think, you know, historically, what is its importance, and have a look what's coming out around this time. But good choice, Dave. I would happily review a record like this again.
Well, we won't be doing it for a little while. Let's put it that way. But for those at home, please do let us know your favourite Corrosion of Conformity album, and if you've been a fan from the start all the way up to present day, let us know in the comments down below. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you on another video sometime very soon. Take care.